I hope you're doing well. So in this video I would like to make an easy watercolor for beginners. It's a lighthouse. So on the left here you can see my first sketch, and on the right my second sketch, which you are going to see me paint step by step in this video. So obviously I've started by sketching the lighthouse and the coast. First I did like a very quick sketch with a pencil, and then I sketched on the top of it with an ink pen. Well, you will probably notice that my lighthouse is like slightly fatter and shorter compared to the photograph, but well, I decided that it doesn't really matter that much, so I will carry on anyways. So I have given a very little attention to details on this sketch because the lighthouse is seen quite from far, and also the landscape is simply a cliff of the coastline. So it's a picture I have taken in Wales quite a few years ago, and I just stumbled upon it recently, and I thought, well, let's just try and make like a quick watercolor sketch with it. So there we go. I think my drawing is pretty much done, and I will start by using a flat brush. So I'm not really happy with this watercolor paper. I don't even know why I carry on using it. Maybe I should just change it. It dries very quickly, and it does not support very well wet on wet techniques, but so that's why I'm not really very happy with the sky I've produced, but well, I did my best, I guess. So I will first wet the sky area with my flat brush, and I used like a yellowish shade because, as you can see on the photograph, the clear sky has a yellow shade. It was probably about sunset time. And then on top of that, before it's dry, I will try and paint the clouds with like a purplish grayish shade. So I will mix my colors, and then you will see that as I go I will add a little bit more blue or a little bit more red on my mix, so that some clouds are more into the blue side and some are more into the purple side. So I'll just do this like loose strokes with the brush, and I will just let the pigment in the watercolor do its job. And so the blue and the yellow are going to mix up, and hopefully will give me a nice cloudy sky. You can see other videos on my YouTube channel where I have painted other examples of cloudy sky and on a better paper. So those on better paper obviously give better results. So this paper doesn't support well the water, so every time I have like a little puddle, I will need to absorb the excess of water with my brush. So I'm adding a little bit of purple here, more with like red nuances, and now just let it dry. I'm almost there actually. So what I'm trying to do is also leave the lighthouse white and not paint on the top of it. And what I kind of failed to do is have darker clouds around the lighthouse so that it pops out nicer. I know that on the photograph the lighthouse is slightly darker than the sky, but I wanted to make it the opposite. On my painting I wanted the lighthouse to be lighter than the sky, and maybe I should have insisted a little bit more with the skies, with the clouds, but I was afraid that my paper wouldn't handle it. So now I will paint the sea, using again different shades of blue and purple. There we go. And I have this wet, muddy area in front at the bottom of the cliff. So I will try to suggest it using the wet on using like a mix of brown and blue. And I will do this before the water of the sea dries, so that the two are going to mix up nicely. There we go. I'm not giving it too much of saturated pigment quite yet, because I will add a little bit of more detail at the end with much more saturated pigments, you will see. And I will try to also slightly suggest my cliff that goes down to the water level. Again, I'm just going to suggest it now and then give a little bit more detail by the end of the painting. My idea is to have like a nice saturated color on the top, on the edge with the grass, and then let it fade away as it goes down. So that's why my brush is kind of laying flat on the sheet. Okay, now it's time to let it dry. And during the time that the painting dries, I can just paint the roofs of these smaller buildings by the lighthouse, because they do not really enter in contact with any of the wet areas. And also I will give a little bit more shade on this opening at the lighthouse and the windows. And now it's time to let it dry. Okay, now my painting is completely dried, and so it is time to continue. And I will use like a green pigment to suggest the grass. I'm using like a more saturated pigment on the areas by the lighthouse, and then much lighter and not so saturated on the other areas, because I do not intend to detail all the grass, obviously. So I'm going to use now a tiny little brush, the one that comes with the watercolor box. And so I use this tiny little brush to give a little bit more detail on the lighthouse, give a little bit of shade to the lighthouse so that it can suggest this rounded shape. And also I will paint on top of the sea with a purple color, leaving some areas transparent so that we can see the color underneath. And so my hope is that this will give a little bit more detail and more watery effect for my sea. And as we come to the front, I will use a much lighter blue so that it looks a little bit more transparent, I guess. There we go. I think it gives a little effect of volume. And I try to leave a little white areas as well, and the junction between the water and the mud, because there are some areas where the wet mud will reflect the light of the sky, so that's why I wanted to leave little white areas. Okay, that's not too bad. And now I'll carry on with my little shadows on the lighthouse so that I can give it a little bit of volume. I will use this small brush as well to add a little bit of shade on these small houses. So as the sky is cloudy, there is not really an obvious shade line, so that's why I'm doing it like a little bit on both sides. And so there is also like a rear plan of the coastline, which is actually currently suggested only with a pen sketch, and I'm going to give it a little bit of grayish finish, but first I'm just going to add a little bit more detail on my cliffs. These are not really rock cliffs, they're more like a muddy cliffs. So they have like very similar color and texture as the beach down. And there is something dark on top of this building. I don't know what it is, some sort of radar maybe. And I'll give a little bit of shadow on the ground. Using a dry brush, it gives the impression of more detailed drawing. It suggests shadows without drawing them all. And this is the coastline on the back that I wanted to give a little bit of a darker shade on. There we go. We're almost there. There is a loudspeaker on the top of the lighthouse, and so it's very difficult to see on the photograph as it's tiny, but this loudspeaker is actually orange. So I'm going to paint it because I think it does give a very nice contrasting view on the top. I don't know what you think. I think I'm almost done with those small buildings. Maybe it's time to stop adding detail, as I do not want them to attract too much attention. They're like secondary architectural pieces there. The lighthouse itself is like more of a main piece. And so I'll give a little bit of detail with a dry brush and a more contrasted pigment of green. The idea is to suggest the grass without drawing every single blade of grass, obviously. That's what I find quite important in watercolors, is to decide what are you going to detail and what are you not going to detail. So the grass obviously wasn't something I wanted to detail, and if you decide to detail every single thing on a painting, well, most of the time it gets like crowded, and it is not a good idea. So there we go, I'm almost there. I will just add a little bit more shade on the clefts. At the end of the day, maybe I did too much. I don't know what you think, but maybe this last shade I should not have added it after all. And also on the beach, there are some stones that I wanted to paint. So these stones, some of them are in the water and others are on the mud. So they will create like a nice link between the two. And so to paint them, I'm using a mix of brown and red and blue and whatnot. And it's like very dark and saturated color. And basically what I'm doing is like a horizontal line, which is not continuous. So I do a line, but I left my brush every now and then. And so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed the painting. If you try to do your own lighthouse, please let me know how it turned out. Thanks for watching and see you soon.